What if the exact moment you stop chasing someone is the exact moment they can't stop thinking about you? Not sometimes, not occasionally, every single time. Here's something nobody explains about people with an avoidant attachment style. They're built in such a way that your absence ends up being louder, more consuming than your presence ever was. And once you go silent, something shifts inside their mind, something even they can't fully explain to themselves, something that has them picking up their phone at 2 in the morning just to stare at your name on the screen. By the time we're through here, you're going to understand exactly what unfolds in their head, stage by stage, and what to actually do with that understanding. You've probably lived through this before. You were pouring everything you had into it, showing up consistently, texting first, being warm, affectionate, available whenever they needed you. And somehow, the more you gave, the more distance they created. They pulled away, they turned cold, they drifted further out of reach. And you sat there wondering what exactly you were doing wrong. So you tried harder, you gave more, you became more patient, more understanding, more available than ever, and none of it worked. Eventually you hit a breaking point. Maybe you got exhausted, maybe someone finally told you to just stop reaching out, and you did it. Reluctantly, maybe even in desperation, but you stopped. You went quiet. And now you're left wondering what's actually going on inside them. Are they even thinking about you at all? Do they care? Did they even register that you're gone? They noticed. And here's where things get genuinely interesting. To really grasp what happens inside an avoidant person's mind once you stop reaching out, you first have to understand how their mind operates in general, because it doesn't run the way yours does. It's wired completely differently. And once that becomes clear, everything about their behavior starts making a lot more sense. Someone with an avoidant attachment style didn't choose that pattern randomly. It formed for a specific reason, usually rooted way back in childhood. Somewhere along the way, they learned that needing people leads to disappointment. They learned that getting close to someone eventually means getting hurt, that relying on another person usually ends in being let down. So their entire internal system built a defense around that lesson. Pull back before things get painful. Create distance to stay protected. Suppress emotional needs before they become a liability. None of this is a deliberate, conscious choice on their part. It's a survival mechanism that took root in their nervous system long before they even had the vocabulary to describe what they were feeling. It runs quietly in the background of every relationship they enter. And here's the heart of it. An avoidant person is constantly caught between two competing forces. On one side, they carry the same fundamental human craving for connection that everyone has. They want to be loved. They want closeness. They want to feel valued and wanted, exactly like you do. On the other side, there's this deeply rooted fear that getting close to someone means losing themselves or eventually getting hurt. So even genuinely good closeness starts to feel like a threat. These two forces are locked in a constant tug of war inside them. And when you were around, consistently present, consistently reaching out, you were feeding that second force without even realizing it. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your steady presence activated their internal alarm system. The closeness started to feel like too much, and their instinct was to create space, to soothe the discomfort by retreating. You probably sensed that pullback and responded by chasing harder, which only triggered their defenses further, which caused them to withdraw even more. It's a loop, and it's draining for both people caught inside it, but then you stopped. And now something entirely different starts unfolding. Let's walk through step by step exactly what happens inside their mind once the contact ends. Stay with me through this whole thing, because each stage builds on the one before it, and the full picture only comes together once you've seen it end to end. The very first thing that happens when you go quiet is something that might sound almost offensive at first. They feel relief, genuine relief. I know that stings to hear. I know you probably wanted to hear that they immediately spiraled and started missing you right away. But understanding why this relief phase actually works in your favor is important. While you were consistently reaching out, texting, calling, checking in, staying emotionally present, their nervous system was operating in a low-grade state of threat the entire time, not because of anything you specifically did wrong, but because closeness itself sets off their internal defense mechanisms. Your steady presence was something their wiring constantly had to manage and resist. Once the contact stops, that pressure lifts. Their nervous system exhales, and for a brief window, they believe they were right all along. That distance is where they feel safest. That space is what actually works for them. This phase of relief doesn't last very long, but it's real, and understanding it will save you from a critical mistake, reaching back out too soon simply because the silence feels unbearable on your end. Because if you break that silence during their relief phase, all you do is confirm their belief that distance gets them exactly what they want. So you have to let this stage run its course, and it will, because right behind it comes the first real crack in their armor. Once that relief settles, and this can take anywhere from a few days to a couple of weeks, depending on how deep the relationship went, they start to notice something, the absence. And that noticing begins quietly, nothing dramatic at first. It's subtle. They reach for their phone out of habit and realize there's no message waiting from you. Something funny or frustrating happens during their day, and their instinct is to text you about it, and then they remember you're not there anymore. A song plays, or they pass somewhere familiar, or a phrase comes up in conversation, and there's a small internal pause. This isn't the big emotional wave yet. This is just the first ripple, but it matters because it's the first time they're actually experiencing your absence instead of managing your presence, and there's a massive difference between those two experiences. When you were around, they were in management mode, regulating, keeping distance, staying just far enough to feel comfortable. But now there's nothing to manage, so instead of their mind moving away from you, for what might be the first time in a long while, it starts moving toward you. Here's where avoidant psychology does something genuinely fascinating. Because their entire system is built around suppressing emotional needs, they don't immediately think to themselves, I miss this person, I want them back, I should reach out. That kind of language feels far too vulnerable, too direct, too emotionally exposed for them. Instead, they start rationalizing the noticing. They think about you, but they wrap it in logic. They wonder how you're doing. They replay certain memories. They might check your social media, not to reconnect, but simply to look, to satisfy a curiosity they won't fully admit to themselves. This rationalization is essentially their suppressed emotional needs trying to break through while their defense system works overtime to keep everything contained. It's like standing in front of a door you secretly want to open, but telling yourself you're only checking whether it's locked. And here's what makes your silence so powerful during this phase. It doesn't give them an easy, reassuring answer. When you were consistently available, they always knew exactly where things stood. They knew you were there, which meant they could suppress their own needs comfortably, knowing the door would be open whenever they finally decided to walk through it. But once you go quiet, that certainty vanishes. And uncertainty is enormously activating for the human brain, even an avoidant one. Actually, especially an avoidant one. Here's something counterintuitive worth understanding. While they fear closeness when it's actively being offered to them, they become deeply unsettled the moment it's taken away. Their logic insists they want space. Their nervous system insists they want proof you're still there. These two things directly contradict each other, and once you disappear, that contradiction becomes impossible for them to ignore any longer. They start to experience what psychologists sometimes call anxious activation, which is almost darkly ironic when you think about it. The avoidant person is now feeling the very anxiety they used to trigger in you. They're the one checking for signs now, wondering what your silence actually means, questioning whether something fundamental has shifted. And this is where their internal story starts to unravel. Up until this point, their inner narrative sounded something like, this person wants too much from me, I need space, I feel suffocated, I do better with distance. But now, with no presence to push back against, that narrative starts losing its grip because you cannot keep building a story about needing space from someone who isn't even there anymore. So what are they actually left with once that story crumbles? They're left facing the real feelings that were always sitting underneath the defenses. And when those feelings finally surface, no longer drowned out by the noise of their protective system, they usually sound something like this. I wonder if I pushed them away. I wonder if I was too cold. I wonder if they're doing okay. I wonder if they've moved on to someone else. I wonder if I made a mistake. This is the moment of genuine emotional reckoning for an avoidant person, and it only becomes possible because you're no longer there feeding their ongoing need for distance. Now let's talk about what's happening in their body during all of this, because attachment isn't purely a mental or emotional process, it's physiological too. When two people form a bond, their nervous systems actually become attuned to one another. We help regulate each other's emotional states without even trying. When you're calm, their system picks up on it. When you're warm and present, their body registers it, even if their outward behavior never shows it. This is called co-regulation, and it's one of the most fundamental building blocks of human bonding. So when you remove yourself from their life, even for a while, their nervous system feels that absence directly. There's an actual physiological gap that opens up, something missing from their day-to-day emotional rhythm that their body had grown accustomed to, and it registers that gap long before their conscious mind can even name what's wrong. This is exactly why avoidants often describe feeling off, restless, or vaguely unsettled without being able to pinpoint why. They're not consciously connecting it to the person who's missing, but their body absolutely is. And that physical restlessness begins feeding directly into the mental questioning that's already underway. Now let's move into the next stage, because this is where things get genuinely interesting. Around this point, which could be a week, 2 weeks, sometimes longer, depending on how deep the connection ran, the avoidant starts doing something they would almost never do while you were still in regular contact. They start idealizing you. This isn't manipulation or a mind game. It's a real, well-documented psychological phenomenon. When someone is present and available, an avoidant person's attention naturally gravitates toward whatever feels threatening about the closeness. They notice the pressure, the expectations, the vulnerability being asked of them. Those become the dominant thoughts running through their head. But once that person is gone, those threatening elements vanish along with them. What remains is the memory of connection, minus the sense of threat that used to accompany it. So their mind starts drifting toward the good parts, the warmth, the laughter, the moments that genuinely felt beautiful, the experience of being truly seen and understood by another person. They start replaying specific scenes in their head, a late-night conversation that went surprisingly deep, a moment you made them laugh out of nowhere, a time you understood something about them that nobody else had ever picked up on. These memories start rising to the surface, and without your daily presence there to manage them back down, they carry real emotional weight now. This is the point where an avoidant genuinely begins missing you, not the earlier intellectual noticing your absence kind of missing, but the deeper, this actually hurts kind of missing. And this is also where a second internal conflict begins to surface, because missing someone this intensely feels like exactly the kind of vulnerability they've spent their whole life shielding themselves from. Feeling this much, needing someone this much, it's deeply uncomfortable for them in a way that reaches back to their original wound, the one that taught them long ago that needing people leads straight to pain. So what does an avoidant person do when a feeling this uncomfortable starts creeping in? They look for a way to manage it, and they usually start with something I like to call the justification loop. This is where they begin cycling through explanations for why what they're feeling isn't really what it looks like. They tell themselves things like, I'm just missing the routine, not the person specifically. It's just habit. I'd probably feel this way about anyone I stop talking to. I'm just a bit lonely today. This is their defense system working overtime to reframe a genuine emotional need into something less threatening, something they can dismiss and file away as manageable. But here's the catch with the justification loop. It can only hold up for so long because the feelings keep resurfacing. And every time they push them down and reframe them, those feelings come back a little stronger, a little harder to ignore because what's underneath is real, and real things have a way of refusing to stay buried. As the justification loop starts to fail them, something else begins happening. They start asking themselves the one question that changes everything. Did I mess this up? This question carries enormous weight for an avoidant person because their entire protective identity is built around never having to ask it, around being self-sufficient, being the one who never needs anyone badly enough to have actually lost something by letting them walk away. But when your silence continues, when you don't return with another message or another call or another sign of how you feel, they can't just brush the question off. They can't tell themselves, no, I didn't mess anything up. They're still around because you're not still around. So the question lingers, growing louder, dragging other questions along with it. Was I too distant? Did I not give enough? Did I take them for granted? Did my own coldness push them away? Do they think I don't care at all? Do they think I don't feel anything? These questions are extraordinarily uncomfortable for an avoidant person to sit with. They've spent years, quite possibly their entire adult life, avoiding having to confront questions like this because their usual distance always kept the emotional stakes low enough that none of it ever truly mattered. But somehow, this particular silence from you is making it matter deeply, and here's why. The length and steadiness of your no contact communicates something that none of your words or gestures of love could ever get across while you were still there. It tells them that you have a limit, that you won't wait around indefinitely, that your presence was never unconditional, that you have a sense of your own worth that outweighs even your feelings for them. And this is likely something an avoidant person has almost never experienced before, at least not from someone they genuinely cared about, because typically the people who love avoidance tend to stick around no matter what. They tolerate the distance. They accept the inconsistency. They keep showing up, keep trying again and again. And while that kind of persistence comes from love, it also unintentionally reinforces the avoidant's internal belief system, which says my emotional unavailability doesn't actually cost me anything. People stay regardless of how I treat them. But your decision to stop contacting them completely disrupts that model. It introduces a variable their internal system never accounted for. It tells them, actually, your emotional unavailability does come with consequences and I'm willing to enforce them. And that realization is deeply, genuinely unsettling for them. Not because you're playing games or trying to manipulate them, but because it's real. Because it hits them with the possibility that this actually mattered to them and they may have lost it. Now let's talk about something that unfolds during this phase that most people never actually witness, because it happens entirely internally, and an avoidant will rarely, if ever, talk about it openly. They start rehearsing conversations in their head, privately, during the quiet moments of their day. They imagine what they'd say if they reached out to you. They draft messages mentally. They picture entire conversations playing out. They think about how they'd explain themselves, or what they'd even want to say if given the chance. This internal rehearsal matters a lot because it shows their mind is moving toward you now, not away. For possibly the first time, the direction of their thoughts is pointed straight at closing the distance rather than maintaining it. But they don't actually send those messages. They don't pick up the phone and call. And here's why. Even with all this internal movement happening, their core fear hasn't disappeared. The fear of vulnerability. The fear of rejection. The fear that if they reach out and you don't respond the way they're hoping, it will confirm everything they've always believed. That needing people only leads to pain. So they hover, they type out messages and delete them. They pick up their phone and set it back down. They visit your social media profile and look without doing anything else. They're stuck in this in-between space where the pull to reach out keeps growing, but the fear of what reaching out might mean is still very much present. This hovering phase is one of the most crucial moments in your entire no-contact period, because what you do, or more precisely, what you continue not to do during this stretch makes all the difference. If you break your silence right now, if you reach out while they're still hovering, You immediately relieve all the tension they've been building up, and you release that pressure before they've had the chance to fully move through the reckoning with their own emotions, before they've truly sat with the possibility of losing you, before they've arrived at a genuine moment of choice. Staying quiet isn't cruelty on your part, and it isn't a game you're playing. You're actually giving them the room to complete an internal process they simply cannot go through while you're actively present, because your presence will always trigger their defenses before they can reach the real feelings hiding underneath. Silence is the only environment where an avoidant person can genuinely hear themselves think, and what they start to hear in that silence is usually something that normally gets buried underneath all their distance and their carefully maintained story of self-sufficiency. No contact affects avoidance far more deeply than most people ever realize. In the beginning, they might feel nothing but relief, but over time, something inside them starts to shift. They begin comparing the version of you who was always chasing, always available, always reaching out first, with this new version of you who has gone quiet, grounded, and stopped seeking their validation altogether. And strangely enough, this newer, steadier version of you starts to feel safer to them, not because playing hard to get is some kind of trick that works, but because someone who's emotionally grounded and no longer dependent on their attention simply feels less threatening and more genuinely attractive to an avoidant nervous system. Your silence forces them to picture for the first time a future that doesn't include you. Before, they assumed you'd always be there waiting. Now they feel the actual weight of your absence pressing on them. For some, this becomes the turning point where they finally reach out. But this is exactly where a lot of people trip up. An avoidant reaching back out doesn't automatically mean they've done any real internal work or changed. Missing you is completely real. Wanting connection again is completely real. But desire on its own, without any accompanying growth, often just pulls everyone back into the same painful cycle. If they do come back, the dynamic between you has to look different this time. Warm, but with boundaries intact. Open, but self-respecting. No more chasing after them. Because true no contact was never really about making someone miss you. It's about finding your way back to yourself. You stop obsessing over whether or not they've responded. You reconnect with your own life, your own needs, your friendships, your goals, your peace of mind. And in doing that, you become capable of something far healthier, whether that ends up being with them again or with someone entirely new. Here's the hard truth in all of this. Not every avoidant person comes back. Some genuinely care and still choose distance anyway because vulnerability feels far more terrifying to them than loss ever could. And as painful as that reality is, someone who feels something for you but still can't act on it is still someone who isn't capable of meeting your needs. So the real question was never going to be whether they come back. The real question is who you're becoming during the silence. Because if they do return and they've actually done the internal work, you get to build something genuinely different together. And if they don't return at all, you walk away stronger, clearer, and more whole than you were before. No contact was never meant to be a punishment aimed at them. It's an act of self-respect aimed at you. The goal was never to make them miss you. The goal was always to stop losing yourself in the process.